Welcome here. I see some visiting faces. This is really fun. Welcome to the first 25. Does anybody know why we call it the first 25? Exactly. The first 25 minutes of the day. So welcome here. This week we've been talking about stories of hope and hearing from staff, teachers from Eden. And we really, like in the history of Eden High School, have had just exemplary female phys ed teachers. And Mrs. Elliot is like the original. And yeah, even though she technically retired a number of years ago, you probably see her daily because she's on the supply list and now she does everything. Well, that was a little bit about you, but can you give us a little more background?
Okay. Yeah, so I brought this just to hang on to. Going through stuff, and this is sort of a support, but going through stuff was, and yesterday was, where to unpack. But first of all, I have to say the blessing that I got from Arnold yesterday in his stories, and I know from my coworkers, summed up so much of what I have experienced as well in life. And I think there's a bond between people that have gone through similarities, not the same, but similarities in different things. But being that, I so appreciate being here. I think because I have always felt it's such a privilege. There are thousands of people that could have come here, and I never wanted to be a teacher. Grade 11, I'm like, I am not going to be a teacher. Absolutely not when I was in grade 11. And yet I had a grade 9, or I had a gym teacher tell me, Miss Bolt, actually, way back, had told me, oh, you're going to come back and teach phys ed. And I thought, you were off, you ever look at your teacher and go, you're off your rocker. I'm not going to do that. Like, I'm not a teacher. My sister should be a teacher. But yet, the way the path I led, I ended up being here, and I have been so grateful. So my sisters went to Eden when it was still private school, Eden Christian College. They were going to build a gym. We didn't have a great gym. We just had one sort of older building in Niagara, and they were having a walkathon. And I was not yet in high school, and I thought, well, I'm going to do that because I'm going to want to use that gym someday, so that's pretty cool. So I went around and like old school, and we had to get pledges, and everybody gave me a hard time because they're like, you're not in high school. Like, why are you trying to get money for high school? I'm like, because I'm going to go there soon. So anyway, I walked 20 miles as a little kid. And it's funny that I had the picture beside me and Mr. George Wishart, who was principal at the time, walking off the parking lot. And I'm this little kid beside Mr. Wishart, who's pretty tall. And I always thought how blessed it was that, I went in there and did a little bit of support for a gym, and it has ended up sort of the school and the gym and the students has supported me for the rest of my life. And I think it has been the greatest honor because I have received way more than I could have ever given on every angle of my life. So it has been such a blessing. So that's how I got to Eden. Did my university thing, took a year of missions in between after high school. And did some missions and had a ball. Absolutely had some of the best experiences of my life on the missions trip, which were just great. So I'm one of those teachers that would say, if you can do a gap year somewhere, go for it. Go for it. It's a big world. There's so much great stuff out there, and you are a changed person. So that might go against what some of the other teachers say, but I believe when your passion leads you back to somewhere, or God will lead you that way when you're open to it, and it fitted me very well for university and stuff like that. So yeah, story-wise, we'll keep going from there.
Yeah. A big part of your story has to do with one of your daughters, Rachel.
Yes.
Would you share with us about that?
Yeah, so pretty early into my career when I was starting a family. So yeah, you think you're doing all the right things anyway. Yeah, my daughter Rachel was born, my firstborn, and from the moment she was born, she would have been considered like a blue baby. She had no pulmonary artery, if you can imagine what that was like. She had no pulmonary artery, so she was very, very sick. Life was, it didn't start off, right? It just didn't start off like you think it should start off. You think, oh, the baby's there, you're all happy. And for me, I wasn't even sure that she was going to live in that moment. My husband was like devastated. He was crying, his head was bowed. And I was just praying. And anyway, within 24 hours, my doctor was really excellent. He said, you know what, this is a really complicated matter. We're going to just airlift her right off to sick kids, which I really did. If you ever hear of that expression, I thought I was somebody else watching somebody else's life. There was this, aircopter coming in, all these guys in uniform, this sick little baby in an incubator that I, barely had time to hold for very long. Packed into this box, doctors, nurses, people in Emerge and all over just watching. And then, at 2 o'clock in the morning, we had to drive to Toronto and walk into Sick Kids, which at the time was an older, darker building. They had since done renovations, thank goodness, for everybody. And so there began the journey of a daughter that was told that, she probably won't live the day, won't live tomorrow. And I just thought, I'm never going to get my child home to her crib. And it was, yeah, it can pretty quickly take me back to those when I speak about it. So I get when people, as an aside, have trauma in their life that, they say you revisit it. It becomes something that is very deep-seated because your love for your child is so great. But anyway, so that was her prognosis. She never had a prognosis, ever. She was, unfortunately, within a few weeks, we had to take her off life support. Maybe I'll jump into a story there. It's a horrible thing. It's beyond imaginable because you hold this child's life in your hands, and you have to make almost like this godlike decision to say, okay, now is the time. And the prayers and the people around us, I knew the churches were praying. I could feel the support, like literally my students, oh my gosh, like the letters, the notes, the prayers, the calls, were all of those things that inputted at the time to strengthen me, which is why I will love students forever. And I mean, I know you see a different side in our professional side sometime, but trust me, I have learned that we love our students, and our students have done so much for me. I could tell you a million stories just of students that have held me alone through the years. And so that's a whole nother issue of community that have inputted into my life when I have been flat out, just humanly broken, as I could say, humanly broken. So, but interestingly enough, very shortly before the time of going off of life support, I remembered a story from my chapel. I remembered, I think his name was Bernie. That's all I know. I'm not 100% sure. It was a very long time ago, going back now, but I vividly, at that time and still to this day, remembered this moment in chapel where this guest speaker had come in, and he had been reenacting sort of, or preaching basically, about Abraham and Isaac. And he did it so well to this day. I can remember it clear as a bell. He just said, imagine you take your child to an altar and you have to trust in God. I mean, the strength to actually do that and to give up that child into the hands of God is beyond human. That is the only way to say it, is that when you can't do it, you have to rely on another's strength. And at that time, as a young mother, I thought, there's no one else to take the spot for me. This is me. This is not my parents. This is not anybody else. I have to do this. I have to stand in some kind of strength that I have no idea of how much it will infill. And I have to say, at the time, my husband held my daughter, which was totally not done. We asked if he could be there to hold her. And we got some pushback politely, and they said, it's pretty traumatic, and I really don't think your husband would want to do that. And he was adamant, and he did. And she breathed. And she kept breathing. And we sat there. She won't make an hour, they said. She won't make 2 hours. She won't make the day. She won't make the night. She won't make the next day. And then they just sort of stopped saying. And she started to pull through. And that basic story of hers continued till she was 14. with 2 open heart surgeries. She needed a heart-lung transplant, which she was never well enough to have, because they will only take children with the best chance of survival, and she didn't have the best chance by the nature of the pulmonary artery situation. But she became this happy, loud girl that was to me, and as I looked through a few pictures yesterday, you may not see them there, I was trying to show a bit of a progression, but she was like the happiest, most outgoing, most loud girl, because when she lived life, she knew every day was a gift. She just knew, although we didn't talk about stuff per se, she knew. She knew that life was a gift, and so she laughed loud, and she coxied a boat. Much to my friends' dismay. They're like, you are not letting your daughter, who was like, she was pretty tiny, coxie that boat with, there was a few ex-Olympian world champions, and it was a fun regatta. It was, so they had these, little picture will come up later, they had these shamrocks on, because it was like, this was the Irish group, and when they took a stroke, her little body was like flinging, and she is just like, go, happy as can be, and that's the way she lived life. It didn't matter how sick she was. She always, she's down there right at the bottom. You see how small she is with the little red shirt and the fake little pipes, just so you know. But big guys, and like I said, some world champions in there, some ex-Olympians. We had a pretty big group of people there, and women and, you know, retirees that were really amazing. But yeah, it was just exciting. But that was her life. She cheered it on the whole way, in the grace of God, and one of the most positive people, and every picture almost that I have of her at home when I went through a few albums was with her smiling. The girl that had so much to complain about, that could barely take a breath on her own, she needed oxygen. That got a little bit of bullying sometimes. Mostly she had a little bit of a flatter nose because she didn't have the greatest oxygen supply, but really that nothing stopped her. She did everything kids. She loved Disney. She loved Tender Wishes. She would always, if you met her, she'd always ask, how you doing? You know, are you having a good day? She was, I've been around a lot of athletes. I would say her endurance is the greatest that I've ever seen. She so wanted to climb a tree, but we took her biking. We did everything we could possibly do to give her as normal a life as possible. She, again, trying to smile, even although all the cords were attached. Loved the dogs, loved Disney. We did all the Disney breakfasts with Tender Wishes. We did manage a trip down there. And she fought hard till she got here, so of course there's a lot there, and I'm sorry if I'm rambling a little bit, because it kind of comes flooding back. My greatest joy was getting her here. Now, that was just before she came with one of my grade 9 phys ed classes. I think at the time she was in grade 8, and they threw a surprise party for her in Gym C, which was really amazing. And we just had the best time, because all she ever wanted to do was get to Eden, because I didn't have the luxury of spending as much time at home. I needed nursing care as much as I could get because she was so complex, and I believe that really helped to extend her life. She was monitored so closely. So that was really pretty amazing. Anyway, she got here in to grade 9. They didn't have the elevator in there, putting it in. I hiked her up the stairs and on my back, and thought I'm going to be in good shape by the end of the semester. And we laughed and we giggled, and I made sure her kilt was down if she wasn't wearing her pants. And it was a special time. But then that's when things changed. And there again is a whole other story of God things. I could mention them, and I know time will run quickly, and it already is. But even maybe I'll just have to skip to that. So she'd had a little bit of a cold, and so this was like September 23rd, just before that, a week before. We had her checked, her blood work came back perfectly. And then when she passed, it was different than they said it would be. It was very peaceful for her. It was not what they had warned me that could happen in a moment. Not peaceful for me. It was a horrible, horrible time, a horrible day. But in all of those things, there was many, many things I could tell you that would amaze you that came together, and many other signs of God's presence. I can't even begin to explain them, and I know they were so unusual and so supportive and so strong that they were, but just the one. Here was the one. So after a brief resuscitation, which I believe was for my family as opposed to for her. When I got her to St. Catherine's, they said, there's no beds at sick kids. And I'm like, are you kidding? The most important time of my life. So they airlifted her to London. And I thought, no, I don't know London Hospital. I don't know the people there. And I thought, God, like, why? Why London and the drive and everything? It was like so traumatic. And yet, because London didn't know her, they went over everything in her medical file even more than Sick Kids was, because here she was, a 14-year-old girl, and they were not going to give up on her. And for me, those were all the answers to prayer that I needed to find some sense of peace, that this was definitely God's timing, that there was nothing more I could have done, that the nurses could have done. This was her time. And as hard as that was to accept, and it is hard to accept, and it's hard, and we've had a recent passing in the school, and we've had students pass over the years. There is a brokenness to that is so deep, that on many sides of the grief factor, that the issue there was that God put those things there. So I probably should quickly sum up, and on the hope aspect of what I wanted to say, really. And if you don't mind, so I stay on track, I'm going to take one paper. I'm just going to read a couple things really quick, because I know we're running out of time. But this will just help me to focus on you guys, because your lives today, you're here. My daughter is not here. You're here. This is both the beauty of it. There is no season of grief that in God's strength can't be overcome. And that is, I am a completely broken person. Every morning I sometimes get up and I think, wow, I'm missing somebody at the table. Still to this day, just because your children are gone to school or gone from life doesn't mean you forget them. And the relationships I built with students over the year too, they've touched us, and I've seen that in the recent years and in this recent passing. They really do. No matter what your story is, we know the story goes different. There's many years ahead. And grief and tragedy and trial are a season. Sometimes they're a short season. Sometimes they're a long season. But they're a season. And just as we are in a fog, we are in a pit, and we can't see, and nothing is around us. It's dark. We have to find meaning to go on in that brokenness, the perspective, and I think Arnold Mr. Brickert touched on that. The sun is still shining. We just haven't been on that lift to get above the clouds to see it. Eventually, that power of God comes back. Not comes back, we see it again. We find it again, and we have a new way of moving forward. So it does come to a few things. One is when we're empty, the power of people pouring into us, church families, family, friends. You only need a few, but there are many people around us that pray for us, and that is huge. And students that inputted that gave me the day to go to the next step. It's like, it's like that. It's a dumb analogy, but when you're training for sport and you're building to the next step. And if you look back at how you maybe played volleyball or basketball or whatever when you were in grade 6, and then you look at how you play it later, if you've developed it, you have moved ahead, even though you think, how much further can I go? But there is a pouring of people, and I just want to relate that back to a couple things. Those Christian threads of all of those people and around us anchor us. And maybe I'll just sort of finish, I've touched on that. At the graveside, which was my fear, God was there. I just know it. I felt it, because that was my biggest fear. I didn't think I could go through it. I didn't think I could do the final parting. And I felt something I have never felt before. And I know someone had said to me, you will find that in God. That will be totally of God, and when you feel it, you'll know. And I knew. And so I will always know. Doesn't necessarily mean that some days aren't hard and some seasons aren't still hard, but I will always know I'm in his hand, and I will always know that there is the hope of heaven. There is nothing more assured in my mind, and nothing I'm more convinced of, and even things that I could tell you that you'd say, really? And people that have lost children have had these experiences, not crazy ones, but things like that. But I want to close with my favorite character in the Bible, who's not really a character. He's a person, and that was Joseph. He was hated by his brothers. He was in the pit and sold. They were going to kill him. I mean, imagine that kind of trauma in a family to that point. Imagine how he felt. And then not only then sent to a strange country, knowing nobody, but put into a good position. So you think, great, story's ending great. He didn't know it. He didn't know the end of the story. He's thrown back into jail, into another season, forgotten in jail for doing the right thing, for standing up, for being a man of integrity. It was not till many, many years later that he was there for the blessings that he received. And in Hebrews 11, and that's where it comes from, faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. In Hebrews 11, it sums that all up, because there's a bunch of real people, not characters, in that scripture that talk about how they went through those very long seasons of darkness. And yet, finally, they rested in that assurance. And some of them saw some of the fulfillment, and some of them didn't. You know, I don't know in my humanness how I've relayed this. It's been a long time since I've really revisited the story and shared it. I just know that the seeds that God plants, he puts into you. So it's there. You're already, and I think I've said this once to one class, maybe briefly, you are already excellent. There is nothing you can do to make yourself more excellent. You are excellent. You just are. And I get to see some of that neat stuff when you graduate, and I meet people down the road, and I have, and it's been so exciting. So you are you, but there is a so much more exciting you coming up, despite the trials. I am blessed to be here now. I am blessed by you guys. You don't even realize it. I am blessed by my coworkers. I am blessed by God every day. I can still look at the big picture. I can still see people struggling in other countries, and I am blessed. So I hope you find encouragement in God as your anchor to know that you are held in his hand, and you will get through those seasons, but do not be afraid to lean on other people. Do not be afraid to ask for help. Do not be afraid to accept the darkness and go, I can't see, I'm broken, I have nothing left, but don't give up. Somehow there will be a spiritual lift through friends or family or prayer or something around you to get you above that pit, out of that pit, above the clouds, and say, sun's still there. The forest is still coming back alive. The warmth is coming. And yeah, I might have another winter, but I'm going to enjoy this one. And that's what I did with Rachel. That's what I did with my other kids, which are 2 other stories, believe it or not. Yeah, so maybe another day.
Thank you. I can't even imagine a better way to end the week. Thank you so much, Mrs. Elliot. Yeah, be blessed. Have a great weekend. And senior girls at lunch in the SLC. If you signed up for Celebrate You, that'll be in the hub, or vice versa. Anyway, come and see us.